Drop it! Bad dog! I screamed, lunging for our golden retriever as he snatched the cracker right out of my 8-month-old's mouth. I was furious. He'd never been aggressive a day in his life. But as I grabbed his collar to pull him away, I looked down at my son. He wasn't crying. He wasn't making a sound. His face was a terrifying shade of blue. That was the second I realized my dog wasn't being greedy. He was performing a rescue on a baby who had already stopped breathing. If you've ever thought a moment was harmless until it wasn't, stay with me. And if a dog has ever stepped in when seconds mattered, tell me in the comments. Stories like this are why people subscribe here. I'll tell this the way it happened. Carefully, without drama. It was a normal afternoon. Snacks on the table. Laughter. The kind of calm that makes you drop your guard without realizing it. Our baby was sitting in the high chair, happily gnawing on a cracker. We'd done this 100 times before. Soft enough, small bites. Always supervised, or so we thought. The dog was lying on the kitchen floor. Family dog. Gentle, patient. The kind that tolerates tiny hands pulling fur and ears without complaint. He'd never once taken food from anyone. Not ever. That's why what happened next felt wrong before it felt frightening. The dog lifted his head, not toward us, toward the baby. He stood up slowly and took 2 steps closer to the high chair. "Hey," I said lightly, "leave it." He didn't look at me. The baby made a sound then. Not a cry, not a laugh. A quiet, wet gasp. I didn't recognize it yet. The dog did. He leapt. The dog moved faster than thought. One second he was on the floor. The next he was on his hind legs, front paws braced against the high chair tray. His mouth snapped forward and ripped the cracker straight out of the baby's hand and mouth, sending pieces flying across the kitchen. "Hey!" someone shouted. "What are you doing?" The baby didn't cry. That was the first sign. He made a sound instead. Thin, wrong. Like air trying to squeeze through something that wasn't open anymore. The dog barked once, sharp, commanding. I froze for half a second, too long, caught between shock and disbelief. The dog didn't wait for me. He nudged the baby's chest with his nose, firm and deliberate, then jumped down and barked again, louder this time, pacing in tight circles beneath the high chair. What's wrong?" I said, my voice suddenly unsteady. The baby's face was changing. Not red. Not crying. Blue. Just around the lips at first. A faint, terrifying tint I wouldn't fully understand until later. "Oh my God," I whispered. The dog leapt back up, placing one paw on the tray, the other pressing against the baby's stomach. Not scratching, not clawing, pressing. Then he dropped back down and barked again, eyes locked on me now, urgent, demanding. That was when panic finally broke through. "He's choking," I shouted. "He's choking!" Hands moved, chairs scraped. Someone reached for the baby, but the dog barked again, stepping in, forcing space, keeping everyone just far enough back. He wasn't panicking, he was directing. I lifted the baby out of the chair, my heart hammering so hard I thought I might pass out. His body felt stiff, too stiff. He wasn't breathing. The dog jumped up and pressed his nose against the baby's back, pushing, then dropped and barked again, sharp, insistent, eyes flicking between the baby and my hands. "Help!" I gasped. "Someone, help me!" I turned the baby face down against my arm like I'd seen in videos but never thought I'd need. My hands were shaking so badly I almost lost my grip. The dog barked again, once, then twice. Each bark timed with the slap of my palm against the baby's back. 1, 2, 3. Nothing. The dog jumped, nudging my elbow harder now, forcing my angle to change slightly. I adjusted without thinking. On the next strike, something flew out of the baby's mouth. A wet, crumbled piece of cracker that landed on the floor. The baby inhaled, a sharp, desperate breath. Then a scream, loud, furious, alive. I collapsed into a chair, clutching him to my chest, sobbing so hard I could barely breathe. "Oh my God," I kept saying. "Oh my God." The dog stood directly in front of us, tail stiff, eyes scanning the room as if he expected the danger to come back. "You," I whispered, looking at him through tears. You saved him. I reached out with one shaking hand and touched his head. Good boy, I said, my voice breaking. Good boy. Thank you. Only then did his body finally relax. He sat down, right there, watching the baby breathe. After the baby started crying, everyone talked at once. Questions, explanations, nervous laughter trying to smooth over what had just happened. But the dog didn't join in. He stayed where he was, sitting directly in front of us, eyes locked on the baby's face, watching every breath like he was counting them himself. I held my baby against my chest, feeling the rise and fall, over and over, afraid to loosen my grip. He's okay, someone said. He's fine now. The dog didn't move. A few minutes passed. The color returned to the baby's lips. The crying softened into hiccups. Only then did the dog finally lie down, not far away, close enough to see. We cleaned up the crumbs on the floor in silence. The cracker pieces looked harmless now. Soft, ordinary, impossible to fear. I remember thinking how stupid it was, how close we'd come because of something so small. The dog lifted his head when I stood up. I noticed that then. He tracked every movement involving the baby. When I carried him to the couch, the dog followed. When I sat down, he positioned himself beside us, angled outward, eyes on the room instead of us. He's being extra protective, someone said gently. I nodded, still shaken, but as the afternoon went on, something else became clear. This wasn't new. Later, when the baby reached for a toy with a loose piece, the dog stood up immediately and nudged it away with his nose. Hey, I said automatically, it's fine. The dog didn't listen. He nudged it again. Harder. I picked up the toy and noticed the small plastic part wobbling loose. I set it aside. Good boy, I said quietly. His tail thumped once. An hour after that, the baby started chewing on the corner of a blanket. The dog stood, walked over, and gently pulled the fabric away, replacing it with a stuffed toy instead. Someone laughed. He thinks he's the parent now. But I didn't laugh because I was starting to see a pattern. Every time the baby brought something near his mouth, something small, something frayed, something breakable, the dog reacted first. Not aggressively, purposefully, he didn't bark every time. Sometimes he just nudged, sometimes he blocked, sometimes he sat up and stared until one of us noticed. It was subtle, too subtle to dismiss as coincidence. That evening, we tried to put the baby down for a nap. I laid him in his crib, still shaken, still checking his breathing every few seconds. The dog followed and lay down near the crib, not pressed against it, watching. At one point, the baby coughed lightly in his sleep. The dog was on his feet instantly. I rushed over, heart racing, only to realize the cough passed on its own. But the mice stayed standing until the baby's breathing evened out again. Then he lay back down. Okay, I whispered, rubbing his head. I get it. Later that night, we sat at the table replaying everything. If he hadn't grabbed the cracker, someone started, I didn't let them finish. I looked over at the dog, lying quietly nearby my eye. He knew, I said, before any of us did. The room went quiet. That was when a memory surfaced, one I hadn't thought much about before. A week earlier, the dog had barked sharply when the baby was teething on a rice biscuit. I'd taken it away, annoyed at the interruption. 2 weeks before that, he'd nudged a piece of food out of the baby's reach and been scolded for it. At the time, it felt like overreaction. Now it felt like warning. That night, when we finally went to bed, the dog didn't sleep in his usual spot. He lay near the baby's crib, facing outward, listening. I lay awake longer than usual, replaying the moment in the kitchen again and again, the way the dog moved without hesitation, the way he acted before fear even had time to form. That was the part that stayed with me. He didn't think. He knew. And whatever instinct had driven him in that moment, it hadn't turned off. By the next morning, the house felt different. Not loud, not tense in an obvious way, just watchful. The dog didn't relax after the choking scare. If anything, he tightened. Every movement around the baby drew his attention like a magnet. When the baby babbled, the dog looked up. When he coughed, even softly, the dog stood. When he laughed too hard and sucked in air too fast, the dog was already moving. At first, it felt reassuring. Then it started to feel deliberate. We tried to go back to normal. Breakfast at the table, toys on the floor, snacks prepared more carefully now, smaller pieces, softer foods. Still the dog hovered, not anxiously, precisely. If the baby brought anything toward his mouth, the dog reacted. Sometimes it was just a shift in posture. Sometimes a soft nudge with his nose. Sometimes he'd stand and stare at us until one of us noticed what he was watching. It wasn't random. It was targeted. Mid-morning, the baby started teething again. He fussed and reached for a silicone toy meant to help. I handed it to him without thinking. The dog stood instantly. I froze, Vaughn. "It's fine," I said, mostly to reassure myself. The dog didn't bark. He didn't growl. He walked over and gently placed his paw on the toy, holding it still. I looked closer. The edge was torn. Just a little. A small flap hanging loose. My stomach dropped. I took it away and tossed it into the trash. "Good boy," I whispered. His tail flicked once. That's when unease crept in, because I realized something that made my chest tighten. He wasn't just reacting to emergencies anymore. He was preventing them. That afternoon, a relative stopped on by. They sat on the couch holding the baby, laughing, letting him grab at their necklace. The dog stood up. He barked once. "Hey," they said, startled. "What's his problem?" I didn't answer right away. I leaned closer and saw the necklace. Thin chain, small clasp, resting right at the baby's mouth. "Sorry," I said quickly, lifting the baby away. "He's being careful." The dog sat back down, calm, like the job was done. Later, while the baby napped, I sat on the floor and watched the dog sleep nearby, or what passed for sleep. His eyes were closed, but his ears twitched constantly. Every breath the baby took seemed to register somewhere deep inside him. That's when it hit me. He was listening for breath, not sound, not movement, breathing. The memory of that blue tint around the baby's lips rushed back into my mind, sharp and unwelcome. The fear settled deeper now, not loud panic, but something heavier. What if we hadn't been there? What if we'd looked away just a little longer? That evening, during dinner, the baby gagged lightly on mashed food. Just a normal gag. But the dog reacted instantly. He barked sharply and stepped forward, forcing space between the baby and the spoon. "Okay," I said quickly, heart racing. "Okay." The gag passed. The dog stayed standing until the baby swallowed and breathed evenly again. No one laughed this time. The room stayed quiet. That was the moment everyone understood this wasn't coincidence. This wasn't anxiety. This was vigilance sharpened by experience. The dog wasn't living in fear of another choking incident. He was living in readiness for the next one. That night, after the baby fell asleep, I stood by the crib longer than usual. The dog lay nearby, head resting on his paws, eyes open, watching the rise and fall of a tiny chest. I whispered without thinking, "You're always watching, aren't you?" His eyes flicked to me briefly, then back to the baby, as if the answer was obvious. And standing there in the dim light, I realized something that made my throat tighten. The first choking incident hadn't been the peak. It had been the warning. Whatever instinct had driven the dog to act that day, it wasn't finished protecting. It was preparing. If you're still listening right now, it's because you can feel how thin the line is between normal and dangerous. If a dog has ever sensed something before you did, tell me in the comments. And subscribe, because this story hasn't reached the moment that matters most yet. After that night, everything narrowed. Not gradually, completely. There was no longer a house full of rooms, no longer a day full of routines. There was just the baby and the dog. The dog stopped reacting to anything that didn't involve breathing. Doors opening didn't matter. Voices didn't matter. Food clattering on plates didn't matter. Breath mattered. If the baby slept, the dog lay close enough to hear every inhale. If the baby stirred, the ghost lifted his head. If the baby sighed, the co adjusted his position. Always closer, never touching unless he had to. I noticed that I started watching the voice more than the baby, because he noticed first. If his ears twitched, I leaned in. If his body tensed, I moved closer. If he stood, my heart followed him. One afternoon, I laid the baby on a blanket in the living room while I folded laundry nearby. The room was quiet. Sunlight spilled across the floor. Normal. The baby giggled and rolled onto his side, bringing a corner of the blanket toward his mouth. The dog stood. Not fast, not frantic, intentional. He walked over and gently pinned the blanket with his paw, preventing it from folding inward. I froze. I watched the baby's fingers tug uselessly at the fabric, then release. Only then did the dog sit back down. That was when I understood something clearly for the first time. He wasn't waiting for disaster. He was intercepting it at its earliest form. Later that day, I tried to hand the baby a teething wafer, soft, dissolvable, recommended one. The dog rose instantly. I hesitated. The baby's mouth opened. The dog stepped closer, placing his body between the baby and my hand. I stopped. We stared at each other for a long second. Then I broke the wafer in half. The dog sat back down. That was enough. No praise, no acknowledgement. Just quiet agreement. That night, the baby was restless, teething pain, overtired. He fussed in that uneven way that made it hard to tell whether he was awake or drifting. The dog didn't lie down. He stood beside the crib, watching, counting breaths. I sat in the chair nearby, exhausted, my head heavy, my eyes burning. At some point, I must have dozed off, because the next thing I knew, the dog barked. Once. Sharp. I jolted upright. The baby was coughing, not choking, not yet, but wrong. The coughs were shallow, incomplete. His face scrunched in confusion, his breath coming unevenly. I was on my feet instantly, lifting him from the crib. The dog circled us, barking again, louder now, then stopped directly in front of me, blocking my path, not away from danger, toward it, toward the kitchen, toward light, toward space. I followed without thinking. The coughing eased. The baby inhaled deeply and cried, loud and furious and alive. I sank into a chair, holding him close, my heart racing. The dog sat at my feet, watching. That was when the truth finally settled in. He wasn't guarding food. He wasn't guarding objects. He was guarding oxygen. And he was prepared to do it as long as it took. It happened when we thought we were finally past it. That's the cruel part. The tension had softened just enough to let our guard down. Not fully, never fully, but enough to breathe again. The baby was stronger now, sitting up on his own, laughing more, exploring everything with his hands and mouth the way babies are supposed to. The dog stayed close, always close. That afternoon, we were in the living room, sunlight on the floor, toys scattered, a sense of normal that felt earned. I was sitting nearby, folding laundry, watching the baby crawl toward a pile of blocks. Bright colors, big pieces, safe, or so I thought. The dog was lying near the couch, eyes half closed. Then he stood, not fast, not frantic, stillness first. That alone made my stomach tighten. He walked toward the baby and stopped, stared. The baby laughed and clapped his hands, proud of himself. He picked up one of the blocks and brought it toward his mouth, gnawing experimentally. I started to say his name. The dog lunged. He didn't bark, didn't hesitate. He snapped the block out of the baby's hand mid-motion and sent it skidding across the floor. "Hey!" I shouted instinctively. "No!" The baby froze. Then his face changed. Not crying, not startled. Confused. He opened his mouth to inhale, and nothing came in. The sound he made was awful, silent. His lips parted, his eyes widened, and his skin, it wasn't blue yet, but it was going there. The dog barked once, loud, commanding. My body finally caught up to what my eyes were seeing. "He can't breathe," I shouted. "He can't breathe." I scooped him up, my hands slick with panic, turning him face down against my arm, just like before. But my hands were shaking harder this time. Too hard. The dog jumped up, pressing against my leg, then darted in front of me, forcing me to shift my stance, to angle my arm differently. I didn't question it. I followed. One strike against the back. Nothing. The dog barked again, sharper, louder. Second strike. Nothing. The baby's face darkened. Time collapsed into noise and pressure, and fear so intense it felt physical. Please, I whispered, please. The dog jumped and nudged my elbow, harder this time, forcing my angle to change just slightly. I adjusted. On the third strike, something flew out of the baby's mouth, a small plastic cap, not from the block, from inside it. The baby inhaled, a raw, desperate breath that turned into a scream so loud it shattered the silence of the room. I collapsed to the floor, clutching him to my chest, sobbing uncontrollably as his cries filled the house. He was breathing. He was breathing. The dog stood over us, chest heaving, eyes scanning the room as if he expected the danger to come back one more time. It didn't. I pressed my face into my baby's hair, shaking so badly I could barely hold him. "Oh my God," I whispered. "Oh my God." Then I looked at the dog. He was still standing, still alert, still guarding. "You saved him," I said, my voice breaking completely. "You saved my baby." I reached out and grabbed his collar, pulling him close, burying my face in his fur. "Thank you," I sobbed. "Thank you." Only then did he sit. Only then did his body finally relax. We threw away half the toys that day, then more, then anything small enough to hide inside something else. But more than that, we changed how we watched. We watched the dog, because he saw what we couldn't. He reacted when we froze. He moved when seconds mattered. That night, after the house finally went quiet, I sat on the floor beside the crib and watched my baby sleep. The dog lay beside us, not touching, listening, counting breaths, the rise, the fall, again and again. I rested my hand on his back and felt it move under my palm, steady, warm, alive. And in that quiet moment, one truth settled deep and permanent in my chest. We thought we were protecting the baby, but all along, he was. If this story made your chest tighten, if it reminded you how fast a normal moment can turn into a life or death one, subscribe so stories like this aren't forgotten. And tell us in the comments, has a dog ever stepped in when seconds mattered most? We thought the dog was stealing food, but he was stealing back the one thing our baby couldn't lose, his next breath.